Hello, and thank you for calling the State Department. If you are in the Middle East, press 1. However, do not rely on the U.S. government for assisted departure or evacuation at this time, even though we've caused all this chaos you're likely experiencing. Also, if you would like to complete a quick survey after this call, please remain on the line. Thank you, and remember, America's back, and we're going to get to winning again.
Welcome to Political Playlist.
All right, are we ready, guys?
Happy hour.
Happy hour.
We fucked that up so bad.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to Political Playlist Happy Hour. I'm Michael Kristoff.
I'm Anna Muskie-Goldwyn.
I'm Anthony Barkat.
That was a good
Well, playlisters, we are at war with Iran. So that is something. On this episode, we are going to talk about Katie Britt, the politician on our playlist. We are going to discuss how to talk about the recent batch of primary elections. And a little bit later, we're bringing you a cheeky win of the week. But first, Iran. And here's what is a little ironic about this. Anna, do you remember?
Is it ironic?
It's ironic because, wait, that's great. I didn't think of that. What is ironic is that last week in our editorial meeting, Anna, I pitched to you talking about the military buildup in Iran.
And
I
was
said,
like, I just
you
feel
know,
like
there's not really anything happening there.
I was like,
Let's
I feel like
wait
something's
and
going to
see.
happen. I was like, we should wait until something really happens.
Here it is. It happened. We bombed the ever-living shit out of Iran over the weekend, killing the supreme leader Khamenei, as well as several high-ranking individuals in the government. The death toll in Iran is quickly rising, which is including, tragically, an all-girls middle school that was hit by a missile that killed 180 young children. It's unclear if this was a U.S. missile. Pete Hegseth, of course, has denied that. These initial stages, we have lost 4 service members, to which Trump said there will likely be more, and that's just the way it is. I guess that's just the way our dear leader is with regard to condolences. The death toll of service members has included 6 service members and 18 seriously wounded service members. It does not look like the bombing campaign here is going to let up. It does seem we are in a full-out war. We're going to unpack all of this and give you our perspective on this. But I guess my first question to you guys is, do we think that young people in America want this war?
I don't think that a lot of young people in America are paying attention to this war, to be honest. I think that there's a lot of stuff that's happening in America for young people, specifically the cost of living. People are like doing their taxes. People are trying to afford their rent. People are budgeting their groceries. And I do think that the effects of this war are going to begin to affect costs in America. We're going to see it specifically, I think, at the gas pump, but I think it also could start to affect other prices of things, maybe if like trade is further disrupted, et cetera. But I think that, as you talk about it, it's like you are someone who reads the news, who watches the news, who is engaged in foreign policy and has opinion about foreign policy. I don't think that a lot of people our age and specifically younger, especially who weren't of age during the war in Iraq, which we were really young, right? There's not really, I think, a sense of this like, oh, we're entering a war in the Middle East again. It's like people who are in their 20s didn't know that we were in war in the Middle East, basically. They didn't come of age when that was such a big hot button issue. I think that, yes, of course, no one is a monolith, but I think that part of what Trump does annoyingly well is he, is able to kind of do things that maybe are unconstitutional, some might argue, by not going to Congress for any sort of authorization, because a lot of people aren't paying attention. And when people aren't paying attention, there's not as much public pressure. And I think that you compare the lack of public pressure on Congress right now, specifically on Republicans, to check Trump's power with the I'm sorry, Anthony. Are you dying?
Anthony, your microphone does come with a mute button.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Oops.
Yeah.
But I think you compare the lack of check on Trump's power right now in terms of Iran with the public pressure on Republicans after what was happening in Minneapolis with ICE. Like, it's night and day when you think about the issues that the public and young people are willing to mobilize around. And I don't feel that this has the same kind of power.
Let's talk about Congress. Let's talk about Congress for a sec here and the semantics of all this. Trump is calling this a war. Secretary of Sigma douche Pete Hegseth also vehemently calling this a war. Marco Rubio, our Secretary of all trades, attempted to justify these strikes.
Look at the nicknames today.
Thank you. I'm just trying to emulate Donnie here. So Marco Rubio was asked what strikes leading to these strikes, what has motivated these strikes, what the plan is going forward. And he responded in an attempted justification by saying Israel was going to attack Iran, and if they did, Iran said they would attack the U.S. So we went in and preemptively struck Iran so they wouldn't attack us if and when Israel attacked them. So that was literally what our Secretary of State said when asked about what led to all this. Several Republican congressmen and women who we cover have been asked about this, and they've really, it's been stunning to see the juxtaposition here. Markwayne Mullin said, this isn't a war. We haven't declared war. He's right about that. Brian Mast said, nobody should classify this as war. This is combat operations. Anna Paulina Luna cheekily smiled through her veneers and said, strategic strikes are not war. So all of that was then bookended by Trump and Hegseth saying, no, this is war. War as hell. So
it's the first time I've really seen the Republicans not be on the same speaking terms, which I thought was interesting.
It's pretty amazing. And I guess, Anthony, my question to you, something I've been struck by all of this is just how dumb they think we are. Do you think that this is going to be a smart calculation on their part, or do you think, like Anna was saying, this is just going to go over a lot of people's heads, or do you think this is actually going to turn into some real political blowback?
I'm not sure on the political blowback part. I think what's really there's a part of it, Anna's, I agree with. I don't think a lot of people are paying as much attention to this and the fact that it is a war, mainly because like 20% of the U.S. population can point out where Iran is on a map.
How ironic. That is good.
I also think what's different from maybe our generation, the younger generation, when September 11th happened, there was an attack on U.S. soil. With Russia and Ukraine, there's a war going on. Israel, Gaza, war going on. It's not on American soil. So it's harder for you to feel that this is a war because it's not on American soil. What I do think is going to happen, a lot of friends in Europe right now, I think in the US, there's going to be a terrorist attack at some point. And are you telling me that everyone in Iran is happy that the Ayatollah is dead? No. And the fact that they just elected his son, probably going to avenge his father's death. I'm just guessing. Yeah. I don't know. So I think that will make this feel even more intense. And then lastly is I just don't understand all these Trump ran on the premise of no wars.
Yeah.
Not being involved in these other countries. I guess this was just a lie, right?
Well,
yeah. And I think that will translate into votes.
I want to touch on something you just said, which is that not everybody in Iran is happy that the supreme leader was killed. And I thought that this was
I think this is good for the world that he's dead.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Yeah, no, this is obviously
and it is a huge win for Trump.
A very vicious regime that is responsible for a lot of brutal death and just unthinkable oppression in the country. And I think what was really interesting, something I saw and heard this week from former General David Petraeus, who I thought put it really well with respect to what you just said, Anthony. And to paraphrase him, he said, the military, the IRGC, and the police force is very powerful, very sophisticated, and very thuggish. And he ultimately thinks that the death toll from these recent protests is going to be well over 15,000 people killed, innocent, unarmed people. And he says that he compared it to the overthrowing of Mubarak during the Arab Spring back in Egypt, when essentially all of the military people threw him under the bus, and they saw the writing on the wall, and they said, yeah, you know what? We're good. He was bad. Okay, we'll work with you guys. And General Petraeus bluntly said, I don't think regime change is possible there. And furthermore, it's definitely not possible by just bombing them and then throwing it to the people to say, okay, good luck. Now's your time. Because this military force that includes police, that includes military, are heavily armed. They are very well located throughout the country, and they total about 1 million soldiers and police officers. That is a lot of people, and I don't know how the people of Iran can be expected to overthrow such a lethal force like that themselves.
Well, can I just read for you a part of a tweet from one of our congresswomen, Yasmin Ansari, who we've had on the show before, and she's one of the few Iranian Americans in Congress. She's definitely the youngest, I think the only Democrat.
Correct.
And so she wrote kind of a long tweet, but the beginning of it essentially said her parents were immigrants from Iran. The beginning of her tweet says that Khamenei was the epitome of evil. She goes on to talk about how horrible he was, but then she says this to respond to what you're saying, Michael. Removing one man does not dismantle a brutal regime. Military force alone will not secure a democratic future for the Iranian people. And it risks putting U.S. troops in further danger if there's no serious plan for what comes next. An action of this magnitude demands strategy, clarity, and a credible path forward. And then she finishes the tweet by saying that she wants Iran to be free, but there should have been a plan in place to help the Iranian people determine their own future. Go ahead.
Also, I just want to follow up on that. On the right side, he's not on our playlist. He wasn't a politician, but Charlie Kirk had very almost identical comments on Iran. Basically, he was completely against going in and bombing and killing the Ayatollah. He's like, what do you think that what comes with doing that? It is regime change, and that is incredibly difficult to do. We've seen the U.S. try and do this before. And it's funny, a lot of my close friends who were huge Charlie Kirk fans, I'm like, hey, your God and Savior Charlie Kirk was against this, but you're for this. So I think
that where I would maybe draw the distinction between Charlie Kirk and Yasmin Ansari on this is I think both understood that regime change is not a small feat. I think that what I would point to with Representative Ansari, though, is that I think that she would like there to be an operation to kill the people who were killed. But I think that what she's saying is to what Michael was alluding to, which is that you can't just go in there and have this 4 to 5 week military action and then be like, all right, good luck, Iranians, figure it out. Because there is a massive military force in Iran. There are obviously people who are still alive connected to the regime. And I think that she, better than most people, understands that only leads to chaos, not to mention the multiple different terrorist cells and terrorist groups within Iran and also within the Middle East and beyond. So, I think what I think is important to listen to what she's saying about is yes, I think that Charlie Kirk was one of the people who held the mantle for we should not be intervening in other countries, which I think people thought Trump felt. But I think that she's taking that in a slightly different direction, which is if you are going to go in and dismantle a brutal regime like this, there's got to be more than just, what was it called? Epic fury, right? It's more than just, it has to be more than just that. And I think that, at least those of us who don't agree with the Trump administration on most things can see that there's a lack of planning and a lack of understanding of how to quote unquote dismantle this. And I think they've, done perhaps what they set out to do in Venezuela, but that's a little bit different. The American interests in Venezuela were deeper. There's not, terrorists running around Venezuela who are trying to destroy the United States in the same capacity. And I think that, killing that group of people is much different than pulling Nicolas Maduro out of Venezuela and putting him in jail. And so I worry because I think the Iranian people have put so much on the line. Tens of thousands of them have died, many at the hands of the government. And now we're going in and we're saying, okay, we're taking down the guy that you wanted, but then I don't know, you're kind of on your own. That's what it seems like for now, at least.
Yeah, I think that this is both a disaster and also a real political loser. And I think it's a disaster from the standpoint that there is nothing that this administration has proven to be really capable of in terms of well thought out long-term strategy mixed with honest communication. And I think that is on full display when you listen to Trump speak about this, when you listen to everyone in Congress speak about this, when you listen to Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth. Everybody is saying different things. And for a party that is usually very good at all getting on the same page with things, they are like shockingly and I think terrifyingly disorganized when it comes to this. This seems like it was not a well thought out political move. Now, I'm not saying that our military leaders and the actual strikes those were incredibly well thought out, and I'm sure went through months and months of planning, and these preparations had been made for several years, I'm sure. And it's nothing of the men and women who are actually carrying out these missions, but the idea that we have now created a power vacuum with no replacement. And so the news and the reporting is that the Ayatollah's son is now likely to be emerging as the new supreme leader. We have the son of the former Shah, who was overthrown in the 70s, who lives in the United States, and he has said he would like to broker a rebuild of the country. And yet we have no European partners in this, it seems. We have no, we have some.
Well, we do. The British and the French are stepping forward to be allies in this with us.
Okay.
Which was a very important step.
Were they part? But they weren't part of the
they have
bombing
since,
campaign.
No, but they have since stepped forward. Britain and France have since stepped forward and sort of pledged allyship, which is essentially, by the way, what happened in Iraq.
Right.
So, we'll see if history repeats itself.
And it just seems like when the Bush administration went into Iraq, they really had a good sales pitch for why we should be doing it.
It was a pitch, that's for sure.
It was a pitch, and we were like, okay, we'll do a season.
It was a fake
and
pitch,
then
but
we got stuck with 20 seasons. Right. And that is just, none of that is here right now. And I think the other really fascinating thing to me, you just talked about Charlie Kirk. You talked about the political ramifications of this. I don't see how Americans, if they're properly told about this, or if this becomes somehow breaking through on their news cycles, which I think it is, right? I don't know how they say this is good for America when, Anna, as you said, the costs of groceries are too high. The cost of gas is too high. The cost of rent is too high. The cost of healthcare is too high. I don't know how this helps get all of these people reelected, which is ultimately what they're after.
Yeah, I think that honestly, time will tell. Because look, the reality is that if they do leave Iran in the lurch in a month and a half or whatever, then probably most Americans will forget about it. Troops won't be involved. There will be some sort of, military operations kind of happening, but it's not going to be a big part of our lives. And then I think we go back to the issues that we were voting on before, which was affordability and immigration and healthcare and all these things. But if they can't manage to at some point de-escalate, pull out, if there is a surge of troops, if there is eventually a push by Congress to have some sort of war powers resolution where Trump has to plead his case like Bush did, then I think you're getting more into the American psyche. The idea of this war is becoming more a thing in people's lives. And then it becomes an issue that people are going to be voting on. But I think there's a couple maybe very conservative people right now who might hold on to this until November in kind of a flipping on Trump way. But I think that for most people, unless this does expand into something much bigger, which it very well could, I think that most people are not going to be voting on the war in Iran as the issue that they care about in November.
I feel like one thing that's maybe working in the favor But it also makes me worried. It's just like, look at the bombing Iran has done. It feels very kamikaze-ish. Just like
Really just going, because they're going
right,
after whatever
just
they can, right?
whatever
Like
they
they're
can.
like, yeah.
Which makes me worried for major events going forward and whatnot. But I would say there's an interesting uniting of the Gulf states.
Yeah.
Almost against Iran.
With the United States, yeah.
With the United States, which I think is almost stronger than the European allies with the United States right now, which we've didn't see in prior, as strong in prior wars. And that's because they're being hit as well.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really unique position in this.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, tell us, Anthony, who is on your playlist this week?
Yes, well, Katie Britt she's the junior senator from Alabama. And I think you guys may have seen, but Secretary Noem was questioned by the Senate Judiciary Committee yesterday.
And I love your name on your recording window here.
So Anthony's name is Secretary Noem's ad spend, which I think they reported was like $200 million or something like that.
$220 million that was given to a company that started 8 days before it was awarded the contract in a no-bid contract. That was a North Dakota firm that it's just...
Okay, we'll dig in. That's next on Anthony's corruption in time.
It's later. It really does piss me off. I'm sorry, though, when like some Republicans like pick at social programs. So like $470,000 was spent on a child's book about this. And you're like, 220 million was spent on ads in 6 months. What?
Lord.
So,
okay, tell us about Katie Britt.
Anyways, Katie Britt. So, junior senator from Alabama. During her questioning, I mean, it was largely aligned with the administration's immigration approach. And she really focused more on children. And this is a lot about her entire persona, I would say, as a senator. So she took her time to focus on child exploitation. And Secretary Noem said that they have found over 145,000 displaced or lost children. They also call them migrant minors, and have returned them to their families who were not being properly tracked by the Biden administration. I was like, wow, when I heard that, 145,000, that's a wild number, right?
Yeah.
So many of these children actually, this is what reports say, they came across the border unaccompanied. They were allowed to be placed with sponsors who are actually smugglers and sex traffickers. And this all happened during Biden. So in June of last year, 2025, only 15,000 were found and, brought back to their families. Now that number is 145,000. I'm calling BS on the number because that's insane. I'm also like, so who were these people that were the smugglers? What are their names? Are they in jail?
Yeah.
So
well, also aren't a lot of unaccompanied minor. I mean, this is just from my understanding, but I think a lot of unaccompanied minors are sent over the border by their parents in a benevolent way to try to, older teenagers and things like that who are considered minors, and then sometimes placed with family members. I mean, I know that. I mean, I'm not trying to negate what Senator Britt is saying, because I think there obviously is an issue of child exploitation and sex trafficking and things like that. But I do think there's also a number of unaccompanied minors from specifically Latin American countries who come in here, and then their, family members will sponsor them who live here, who are not smugglers.
Yeah. I think it's important to give context to this a little bit too for our listener who maybe missed it. But yesterday, Secretary Noem was hauled into was it the Homeland Security Committee or the Judiciary Committee?
Which is very senior.
The Senate Judiciary Committee. And this comes in the wake of a government shutdown that is affecting the Department of Homeland Security. Republicans and Democrats are both digging in their heels in terms of trying to regulate and curb what is pretty insane behavior on the part of ICE. And basically, Democrats have put forward a 10-point list of proposals that they want agreed to, such as no masks, needing to show ID, needing a warrant to enter a house, these types of things. Republicans are saying are pushing back on that. And so this comes in the wake of we are in a shutdown right now for Homeland Security. And I think that it's important to note that that shutdown is affecting Homeland Security, which, to your earlier point, Anthony, about the potential of a domestic terror attack, particularly in light of the fact that we are now at war with Iran, those odds and chances have gone up even more. And so for that department to be facing a shutdown right now, I think is pretty egregious. And I'm curious, like, when Britt was grilling her, did they talk about just the other elements of DHS that's being taken away and used up by ICE and those other holes and gaps that are likely in the department?
No, but like this is quite normal, right? When you have the other party,
or do you want like a throat lozenge or like
I don't know,
hot tea? Do we have a production assistant who can fly in a tea for Anthony?
Yeah, but I mean, this is quite common that you see when it's the same party questioning, right? Katie Britt was really throwing some layups to her on a topic that was not being discussed, which I don't think is so much data behind and people aren't really focused on. But, that just getting back to Katie Britt, like, so she was elected in 2023 to Alabama, and, she's in there till 2029. She's the first woman ever elected to U.S. Senate from Alabama, and she's the youngest Republican woman elected to Senate. So she's like, she will probably be in this.
Leave it to Alabama for being progressive.
Yeah, I mean, she will probably be in this position, I could see like maybe for the rest of her life. And she's really being looked at as that next generation GOP voice, like possible future leader. She got kind of well known on the national level when she gave the GOP talking points after one of Biden's State of the Union.
Oh my God, do you guys remember that when she was
rebuttal.
in the kitchen?
Oh yeah,
the
Oscar-winning performance.
Oh my
but it was hilariously mocked by SNL. And Scarlett Johansson played her.
Yeah.
But she's super focused on family policy. So childcare, maternal health, child safety online. And many of the bills that she's introduced have actually been bipartisan, all focused on these issues. So
that's what I think is an interesting thing for people to kind of distinguish about someone like Katie Britt. And it's like a challenge, I think, if you're very far right or very far left, to look at somebody and maybe see the good in some of what they're doing. Like, for example, Katie Britt partners on a lot of family bills. Like, she's one of the Senate companions to things that Lauren Underwood is doing in the House, who's very focused on maternal health and childcare and things like that. And so it's interesting because I think that what Katie Britt approaches a lot of that with is a genuine care for wanting, women to be healthy, children to be healthy, families to be strong. But then at the same time, I think then you can kind of get into the flip side of that, which is the more extreme right version, which is this thing of like, Biden let all these children be exploited, and I think it's okay as a voter, as a citizen, to acknowledge both, right? Like, if you disagree with her, it's okay to acknowledge that she was giving layups to Noam and that she was kind of talking about this exploitation of children in a way that sounded kind of exploitative. But then at the same time,
I didn't think about it that way.
But then, at the same time, to kind of give her props for like, okay, you're working on bipartisan bills to find areas of consensus around things like maternal health. And like, that is what I think is so important to focus on about a lot of young politicians, and a lot of specifically young politicians who are going in and, at least trying to put their best foot forward maybe at first, that like, people are complex and people can be both bipartisan and very extreme at the same time. And that's the reality that we live in. And you can't paint one person black or white, I think 100% of the time.
Yeah. So I'm not going to go through all of her bills. We can post about them, but they are all pretty great. But I will say where she did lose me is at the end of her questioning, she brings up a poster and it's of like 8 faces of bad people that they've sort of caught in this child exploitation world. It was like El Chapo. It was the like Subway, the guy Jordan from or what was his name?
Oh my God, Jared.
Yeah, Jared from Subway.
So
God.
But you know who was missing? Jeffrey
Epstein.
Oh my God.
Oh.
You're like,
that's interesting.
While we're in like one of the largest
Wow.
child exploitation cases, like people are not refuting, even on the Republican side, that
that
he was not
Yeah.
trafficking young women.
Wow.
So
wow.
and I was like, oh, I mean, that seems like a
no-brainer.
little bit of a miss.
A little bit of a miss.
Wow.
So
that's wild.
Yeah.
Well, I think like, to just sort of come back to the whole fact that our Department of Homeland Security is facing a shutdown here and what are the political ramifications. I think what we're soon going to see as a talking point among the right is, hey, Democrats, you have to fund this. Otherwise, the next terrorist attack is going to be on you. And Democrats messaging here, I think, needs to continue to be, no, we are not going to let you run havoc in our cities. By the way, only targeting Democratic run cities with this masked police force that seems to be above the law. And I think that, from a messaging standpoint, would I have liked to have seen Hakeem Jeffries and the Democrats put forth maybe like a list of 4 or 5 things rather than 10? Yes, I think that probably would have been smart. Like, let's do the 4 legs of the table here, and like I think you can fight that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like
true.
Yeah.
Instead, we have 10 legs on this table.
10 legs.
Who designed this?
Right.
Who designed this?
The 10 Commandments. It's like, okay. But I think that, this issue is proving to be very, very palpable for Democrats. And I think that they need to keep fighting that and holding strong because they're winning on it. And I think that Republicans need to start showing that they're actually putting legitimate resources and leadership towards these elements other than immigration that fall under the umbrella of Department of Homeland Security. And I think, immediately to the fact that fun meme that was going around the internet a year ago has resurfaced, which is the 23-year-old kid who's been appointed as the head of the counterterrorism unit in Homeland Security. And he literally is like barely a college graduate and worked at a grocery store prior, has zero national security background. And so the idea of like, okay, well, that is the person who's in charge of counterterrorism. That's the department that's going to be in charge of hopefully preventing the next attack on American soil. And this all falls under Kristi Noem's purview and ultimately Donald Trump's purview. And so my fear is that this is yet again going to be a way where this administration and these frankly unqualified cabinet members avoid responsibility at every step of the way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of Democrats fighting, let's talk about how to talk about the primaries.
Let's talk about it.
So we had our first primaries of the 2026 election year yesterday, and they were a doozy. So I want to focus on a few key races and kind of explain what each of these wins, losses, or runoffs kind of means. Because I think that very often in politics, people get disenfranchised because it all just kind of seems like a game, which it is. But it's a game with like massive implications, right? And so I think we can dive into...
Can you just angle your mic a little bit towards you?
Me?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
No,
towards
just
me?
like angle it so that it's like towards you.
Okay.
It's like kind of by the side.
What are you talking about? This is how my mic always is. Like this?
What? Yeah, just if you could aim it directly at you.
Like this?
Yeah. Better. I was having trouble hearing you.
Okay. So I want to focus on a few of these key races, but also explain what they mean, because I think that people get disenfranchised because they view politics as a game, which it kind of is, but it has big implications. So we'll dive into the results, and then I think we should talk about like what this actually means for us as Americans, even if we don't live in these states. So let's start with the Texas Senate primaries, which was sort of the marquee event of the night. So State Representative James Tallarico beat Congressional Representative Jasmine Crockett in the Democratic primary by about 7 points, and he got above the necessary 50% threshold to advance the general election in November. Then on the Republican side, incumbent John Cornyn, who's sort of like a Bush-era Republican, came out pretty much neck and neck with State Attorney General Ken Paxton, who is like MAGA through and through. And despite having a lot of personal baggage, he seemed to pull through pretty well. So someone on our playlist, Wesley Hunt, who's a young Texas representative, he was sort of the spoiler in this Republican race, which like, I don't know what's going to happen to him after this, but he got just above 13%, which then is forcing Cornyn and Paxton now into a runoff, which means the Republicans will keep having to spend money on what has been the most expensive primary race or Senate race ever thus far. And they have to spend money on beating each other instead of campaigning against Tallarico, which ultimately is going to benefit Tallarico.
Imagine, just 125 million spent on the primary between the Dems and the Republicans.
And then when the race isn't even started.
And then this runoff is going to be at the end of May. It's like May 27th. So during this whole time, the Republicans are still going to be bashing each other. Democrats can start getting united force. Seems like Jasmine Crockett's already on board.
Yeah, she's issued a statement. She is uniting with James Tallarico. We love to see it.
Oh, wow. That's great. Yeah, I haven't heard about that.
Yeah.
Fun fact about Wesley Hunt, though. Yeah. He has 3 million followers on Instagram.
He's crushing it on social media.
I didn't realize how big his fall. I mean, he's going to do something after this. It shows he's well liked.
But we'll see.
The question, I was just going to say, like, I mean, to your point about him being the spoiler here, it does seem like the matchup that the Republicans would have wanted was Jasmine Crockett. That I think all three of those guys probably beat her in the state of Texas, including Wesley Hunt. I don't think Wesley Hunt was ever a shot, but he's a spoiler candidate. And I think the question is, okay, where does his 13%, where does he throw that support behind? My sense is he throws it behind Ken Paxton. And I think that if the Republicans nominate John Cornyn, he's going to beat Tallarico. If the Republicans nominate Paxton, Tallarico has a real shot, and I would even tip the race likely to Tallarico in that.
Yeah.
So I think that they sort of have a bit of a Sophie's Choice moment here because John Cornyn is the least liked by Trump. In fact, I think Trump would like to see Cornyn go, but I don't think they hold that seat if it's Paxton, given his baggage and given his polarization.
Right. Well, so let's just take a step back, though. I agree with everything that you're saying, and I think most Politico people do. But what I'm interested in is, like, what does this mean for us? We don't live in Texas. Most people in this country don't live in Texas, but half this country is blue, half this country, or 30% of this country is blue, 30% of the country is red, 30% is somewhere in between. And I think that what's important to look at these races and say, okay, so if it's Tallarico versus Cornyn or Paxton, right? What does that tell us about the state of where we're at as a country? And is that a good sign? Is that a bad sign? What do you guys think?
Yeah. I think it's a really telling sign that it was an all-time high in Texas of primary voter turnout. And I think that tells me that everybody right now in this moment that we're in the country is super engaged. I would actually use that data point to counter something you said about when we were talking about the Iran war, which is, are people following this? Yeah, hell yeah, I think they're following it. And you saw it. You saw how closely people are following politics based on those Texas results. And I think the Iran war is too soon to tell. You can't really tell if this turnout had anything to do with that. But my point is that they're engaged. So they're hearing about the Iran war.
You want to know a crazy stat?
Yeah.
So just to show you in terms of how many people turned out. So last primary for the Republicans, basically about the same turnout. It was like 2.1 million people. For the Democrats, when Colin Allred was running, it was like right under 1 million.
Wow.
This time it was 2.4 million.
More Democrats than Republicans.
People.
I think Colin Allred wishes this was the time he was running.
And you know what?
Scary.
This is what it tells me that is really interesting is the power of social media and the internet. Like both Tallarico and Crockett are internet sensations for different reasons. She sort of has that kind of like Kamala Harris questioning in Congress, super anti-Trump administration brashness about her that I think a lot of people resonate with and still do even after this loss, right? And then you have Tallarico, who kind of became a sensation for his or the way he kind of preaches about politics, looking for civility, that kind of thing. And whichever version you prefer is kind of irrelevant. What I think the interesting point is like there's a way now for people who can message effectively, and whatever that message is, to create excitement that otherwise would have been lackluster. You know, if this was just a state representative running against a member of Congress, it would not have been that exciting, but it was two viral politicians running against each other who basically agree on the issues, but just had very different tones. And for me, I think that that's really notable when we start to look at elections around the country over the next several months and in November, because it's like, who are these other people that are going to start to garner this kind of, you know, attention from the internet and from culture? And that obviously can drive not just that person to winning, but that campaign and that race to the forefront in a way that I think is ultimately really powerful. Because to your point, Michael, it gets people to vote. It gets people to come out and vote. And that is ultimately exciting and the whole point.
I also think this is a really big flashing indicator for midterm turnout. And I think that when you look at the historical data and precedent of Donald Trump era that we're in here, when he is running as a challenger, he is an incredibly effective candidate and has always won when he's running as the replacement option. And he has always lost when he is running as the incumbent. And that has been the case with midterms and presidential. And I think what is really interesting here is that, you know, I think all of these Republicans are really, really nervous about what awaits the midterms for them and their party. And I think Trump is equally nervous. He clearly is thinking about that. And I think that this huge turnout and this huge money spend is really going to be just the tip of the iceberg as to where we're heading in November, because I think that, quite frankly, this, you know, without getting like too deep and philosophical here, I really do think we are kind of in uncharted territory as far as the country and what we're seeing in so many facets and the political division that we're in and just the rapidly changing environment of us and the world. And I think that people are paying attention. And I don't think, as much as I like to think that, okay, yeah, there are people who are just tuning it out and whatnot, I'm sure, but I think that more people than not are really aware of what's going on and really feeling like, hey, either this is not the right track, or this isn't really what I voted for, or hey, this feels really bad and like nothing in my life right now is working. So
or the opposite of that, which is the next race I want to talk about, which is, fuck yeah, this is exactly what I wanted. Because I think that MAGA stronghold is still fucking strong. And it showed nowhere stronger than for against our guy, Dan Crenshaw, who we talk about all the time. And Dan Crenshaw, who was elected in 2018, he lost the primary to a very MAGA state representative named Steve Toth by, I think, 8 points. A lot of points.
Yeah, it was
Crenshaw
a drumming.
has a
No,
massive...
it was like 16 points
Okay.
ended up being.
So
Yeah,
Crenshaw
it
has
was a
a
drumming.
massive following by any stretch of the imagination, is incredibly conservative, has a big megaphone, is a very smart guy in a very Republican district that did shift a little bit because of redistricting, which some say contributed to this loss. But like I would say 100% to what you're saying, Michael. But at the same time, we cannot underestimate how much the power of like Trumpiness is still a powerful force. You look at Ken Paxton, challenging John Cornyn effectively. And then you look at this guy, Steve Toth, who handed Crenshaw this loss essentially because Crenshaw, really what it was, is Crenshaw refused to say that the 2020 election was stolen. This was 6 years ago. And Trump has held that over him.
And by the way, it wasn't stolen.
By the way, it wasn't stolen.
Oh, yeah.
But Trump has held that over him. Despite Crenshaw agreeing with Trump on almost everything, voting with Trump and the administration and Republicans on almost everything, but
95% of the time,
having a slight independent bend to his voice was enough for him to get clobbered by a very MAGA aligned candidate. And so I think that what you're saying is totally true, but it's also true of the diehards. And I think we had races in Texas that show that.
So yes for primaries. Yes for primaries. And here's where I would push back is that when you look at, again, going back to the historical data of these candidates who were the Trump-backed candidates, who were the farther right option, I'm thinking of Kerry Lake in Arizona. I'm thinking of the guy, I'm thinking of what's his name in Pennsylvania. And we can point to a lot of these different races where the farther right candidate emerged from the primary and then went on to lose in the general because yes, that MAGA base is certainly very alive and well when it comes to primary, but I think we overinflate their power and their numbers when it comes to the general. And I think, like, again, this is if the Republicans nominate Paxton, mark my words, Tallarico wins. I think Dan Crenshaw should have, the people in that district, if they wanted to keep it red, should have voted for Crenshaw. I think
they're going to keep it red. It's like
this guy's run a few times, by the way, for this position. Yeah. So I don't kind of agree with Michael. I think like the people have known him for a while here and have been so on him because he's lost. But the real reason why Dan Crenshaw lost is because he has not answered us to come on this show for an interview.
Dan, now you come on.
I think we can get a lane on the show.
Let's go. Dan, if you're listening, come on and let it rip. Let's do this.
So before we get to our win of the week, I just wanted to mention just really briefly a couple races that I think are really pertinent to political playlist and all the stuff that we talk about here. So specifically, there was a North Carolina House race that is potentially heading to a recount where 32-year-old Nina Alam challenged Representative Valerie Foushee, who's 69 years old. And then in Texas, 37-year-old Christian Menifee, who just won a special election in Texas and was sworn into Congress, but then had to immediately begin campaigning again for his seat, is now headed to a runoff with 11-term incumbent Al Green, who is 79. So these pushes from 32-year-old Alam, 37-year-old Menifee are really impressive. I think everyone thought Menifee especially was going to get clobbered by the machine of the Democratic Party with Al Green. And I think it's a really amazing sign just in general for young Democrats around the country. And a quick teaser, we are going to have some of these amazing new young candidates on the Democratic side coming on the show for interviews to just get a better understanding of like, who are these challengers? What are they pushing for? Some of them are running against really long-term Democratic incumbents. Some of them are running against Republicans. And there's a new generation of Democrats who are kind of showing how it can be done. So that's very cool.
Yeah.
Which could actually be the win of the week, but I know you have your own. So,
well, the win of the week will obviously melt your heart, Anna. Of course, the prize has to be awarded to none other than Hillary Clinton, who reminded us that, yes, she should have been president. Yes, she is a certified baddie. And yes, Lauren Boebert might be actually the legitimate stupidest person
I didn't know that
right
she
now.
Didn't have a high school diploma. Did you guys know that?
Like, it shows.
Obvious.
I do now.
I mean,
yeah, it's very clear.
Her questions were like, so bad.
It's
like
also
so dumb.
It's sad almost how dumb she is.
By the way, during a deposition, you're really not supposed to like, it's not worth it for you to have to explain that to Lauren Boebert either.
Right.
So that is why Hillary Clinton didn't sit there and go, these are the dumbest questions. That's what.
No, I mean, that's what I think is good about Hillary Clinton. Like she sat there and she didn't need to say it was dumb. She expressed how dumb it was with her responses.
And Anna, can you just sort of tell our listeners like what this was exactly?
So basically Hillary Clinton was called in to testify in front of the House Oversight Committee about the Epstein files, which, by the way, she's barely mentioned in. She has never been personally connected to Jeffrey Epstein, but as many women in our country had to answer for the sins of her husband. So she was called in. She looked dashing in her blue pantsuit, and she was answering the questions, many of which were incredibly dumb, like Lauren Boebert getting into.
And by the way, just to back up, like she wanted to do this out in public.
She wanted to do it in public.
And they said, let's do it in private.
She and President Clinton wanted to do it in public, have a public hearing. Then the committee said, no, we're going to do it in private. She said, fine. She goes in, she starts answering the questions. Partway into the hearing, someone finds out that a picture of Clinton sitting at the table has been leaked on social media by conservative influencer Benny Johnson. And I actually didn't know this is what happened, but there's a Clinton aide who mentions it in the hearing. You can hear that aide off camera. Hillary Clinton is like completely befuddled, looking around like, what the fuck? And then you hear Lauren Boebert like on the sideline being like, oh yeah, I sent that.
Right.
And it's just like, are you kidding me? Like, you can't even like just keep your mouth shut and like let other people figure it out. You're just going to be like, oop, yeah, that was me, like whatever. And so anyway, to Hillary Clinton's credit, she did not get enraged, although I'm sure she was on the inside, but she did her team requested to stop the hearing temporarily, and they eventually did come back. But the whole thing was just like, it's just treating it like middle school lunch as opposed to the government. And it's very frustrating for me. Look, I know a lot of people have strong feelings about Hillary Clinton, but like, regardless, it's very frustrating to see someone like Hillary Clinton who can insert, someone like who's like a very respected, someone like Mitt Romney, like someone who, regardless of political beliefs, has like actually put in the time to try to do good things for their country and is an intelligent person, sit in the same room as someone like Lauren Boebert.
Right.
I'm still upset she just didn't have her kicked out. She should have. She should have said, you broke the rules. But I think
to her credit, she was like, why? Like, we're not gonna escalate this beyond what it needs to be, because then this will be the story, which by the way already was, instead of the fact that I am answering all these questions, which is exactly what you asked of me.
Yeah, I'm with you, but I also disagree, because I'm like, who's going to hold people accountable to the rules anymore?
Well, the public, I think, in this case.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's why, just to go back to the colossal stupidity of Lauren Boebert here, this is why elections matter. And this is why it is so important to like look at people's credentials and their qualifications and to vote people into office who are serious-minded, actually smart and capable folks. And I think what was on full display here was Lauren Boebert's real idiocy. And it makes me sad that this is a member of a prestigious body like Congress. And I know there's some great people there, there's some terrible people there, but I just think that the role and the goal of this next generation of leaders as well as voters has to be raising and heightening the bar for entry, because if we continue to let in unqualified people, then we're going to continue to fail at solving the real problems that we face. All right.
We'll see. TBD.
We'll see. Stay tuned.
Stay tuned.